Hello, this is your host Sheila Bender, and I am pleased to be here today with Judith Kitchen and Stan Rubin, co-directors of the Rainier Writers Workshop MFA program at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington. I'm so happy to have you both here in the studio today to talk about MFA programs, people's feelings towards them, and especially what your program is up to. And I understand the ways it is different from others, that your focus has something very special about it that I know will come out to our listeners. Let me start by telling our listeners a little bit about you. Stan Rubin recently completed 2 years as chair of the National Low-Residency MFA Directors Caucus of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. He's a poet whose 5 published collections include Hidden Sequel, winner of the Barrow Street Book Prize and a small press distribution bestseller. His essay reviews of poetry appear in Waterstone Review, published by Hamline University. He's been a full-time resident of Port Townsend for 9 years. Judith Kitchen is a writer who's written a novel, a book of criticism, 3 collections of essays, the latest called Half in Shade, which will be out in spring 2012 from Coffee House Press. She edited and co-edited an anthology of poetry and 3 anthologies of short nonfiction pieces. Another manuscript of fiction is currently looking for a publisher. Regular reviewer of poetry for the Georgia Review, she is the winner of 2 Pushcart Prizes and a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. She teaches nonfiction in the MFA program she co-directs at PLU. I'm so glad to have both of you here. I'd like to start our discussion today by finding out how it was that you came to create and direct this program in Tacoma, Washington.
Well, Judith and I had a long history of working in literary education at all levels. And I'd been a university professor of it and run a program in the East. And we had engaged in conversation with writer friends at places like the Associated Writing Program's annual meetings. We'd have a dinner and just talk about how we might do this kind of thing. And
can I just interrupt to say, at the time you were talking with these writers, there were many MFA programs in existence. So when you say this kind of thing, I take it that you had a special slant.
We do. We had, really, Judith and I were co-founders of this thing, and we worked it out for 2.5 years of discussion with Pacific Lutheran University, which is actually south of Tacoma, not in Tacoma. And our notion was we had certain founding principles, and we may get into a discussion of what people think of MFA programs in general.
These were the points you were discussing ahead of time with the writers at
well, those were loose conversations. They weren't really aimed at
so
this
you had
outcome.
that interest for a while.
Right, that's the point. It was going on for a while, and we wanted a program that would be what we are. We're 3 things, I would say. I don't like to be reductive, but 3 little bullet points about our spirit. We're national. We're for grown-ups. I like to use that word. It's a kind of high-flying word of pedagogical theory, grown-up. And we are high-end. We're for people who are writers and are going to be achieving writers. But our notion was to have something that would not be a set of academic hoops you jump through to get the prize, and not to have something where the people we worked with would be our acolytes, where there would be a disparity in power. So we have really a communal sense at our program, and everything about it, I like to say, is collaborative. The participants in our program are partners in everything, and sometimes the sole deciders of their course through the program. And it's got a very nice spirit. Another element of this was not to be destructively competitive. This goes with the business, as I'm sure you know, and not to say all programs are by any means, but there is something in any art. When you get artists together, there can be a sense of what rung of a ladder am I on, or whose favor do I have. We didn't want that.
You've been able to devise a program in which people feel collaborative rather than competitive, and that's quite a feat. So, of course, I'd like to hear how you accomplished some of that.
Well, it just in general, it has to do with the spirit of the place and our notion of what goes into a writer's life.
That is a wonderful thing for us to talk about, what goes into a writer's life. That is kind of the founding mission of this program, discussions on writing and the writer's life. What are the elements?
That's a very good question. If you find out, you can tell me.
But we all know some of them, I think, just by living them.
Seriously speaking, we view writing as an old-fashioned way. It's a kind of lonely thing. It's not done communally, even though there's all sorts of communal activities we all can engage in. But it's between you and the page and your demons that you perhaps never managed to put to rest. Maybe they are what charge you up and energize your art, whatever it is. So you have to be able to have discipline. So that's one thing that goes into the writer's life. Self-discipline, discipline, the ability to do it even when you are not, the gods aren't telling you to do it. Your spouse or partners or friends aren't telling you to do it. And you're not even very inspired, and you have nothing to send out. And if you send it out, it's getting rejected. But in our sense, a writer sustains a writing life. And we like, in our program, some contribution to the writing community is good, too. We certainly are communal. We have a strong national community. But I think at the core, we recognize that writing is a kind of wonderful, inspired loneliness.
Oh, I like that. A wonderful, inspired loneliness.
Another thing I would say that we have offered people is, a one-on-one mentorship over a full year, which is different from other programs. I think anybody who's taught, and especially worked with adults, knows that you have a half-year shtick within you, just little things that you can do to help somebody's work. But what I have found teaching in the program is that it's the second half of that year where whatever they are doing, and when I've run out of my usual quick fix kind of responses, I have to be challenged too. And we come up with, I think, a deeper conversation. And so what I view us as doing is offering a deadline, number one, which is often very useful. Maybe the most useful thing we do, but to pay a lot of money for a deadline seems sort of weird. And this long and somewhat leisurely conversation in which there's enough time to really address an individual writer's individual needs and challenge them a little bit, and in return be challenged by them. And that is something that most, even low residencies, do not have, is that year of luxury of working together.
I like what you're saying, and it's interesting to me to put together the idea that you instill in your candidates the idea that writing is an inspired loneliness, and yet they have a mentor. So they have a guide and they have a community. And I know that all of that exists in the writing life, and I find it really interesting and valuable that as two writers, you bring that to your community in the MFA program. They do all go along with each other, but they can't interfere with each other. I imagine when you're sitting and you're writing, you're doing your inspired work alone. And then when you show it to a mentor, your mentor, guide, and teacher, what is happening?
Well, people work intensely with one of our fine faculty writers who, like the participants, are from around the country. One of our thoughts was not to have regional voices, but national voices. And I think through the last year, we were representing something like 25 or 26 states and Canada among the participants, with a nice selection from the Northwest, of course. But we do have an exuberant community during our residencies. I think, and I'm caught saying, I think when it comes to enthusiasm level, we have to be pretty much at the top of the list of any kind of program. But during the year, you are working intently on an agreed-upon schedule with a mentor who's paying the best literary attention to your work. And I think all low residencies would say that you get this. One thing that makes us a bit different is we're not looking to give anyone a quick degree. Our goal is simply literary achievement, or at least a sustainable writing life. So we're not looking for the quick hit. That's what Judith was just talking about. We have a longer program, and it's not for everyone, but we consider the entire program a self-development process.
So let's fill people in then on, first of all, what low residence means. And second of all, perhaps even what MFA means. And thirdly, the length of your program then. The MFA program, Master of Fine Arts in Writing, is that what yours is titled?
Yeah. MFA is a terminal degree in any art. If you were a sculptor, in acting, and you went to graduate education, you would receive an MFA degree, and I think it's most appropriate for the art of writing. there have been a couple of places, a handful, that have PhDs in creative writing right now, which kind of gives me a little shudder up my back because I guess it brings out my purist side. Don't always know I have because it really is, I think, response to market to try to...
Well, that's a question that I wanted to follow up with. Why does a writer who is doing their inspired work in a lonely attic somewhere, why do they want to pursue an MFA? I understand that as a professional or someone who wants to teach, a graduate degree is significant, but your MFA program is a gathering place for people who want to be serious, for grown-ups who want to cultivate their art. How does it enhance them or your program that it actually is a graduate degree?
I would say, first of all, no one needs an MFA in order to be a good writer. And so many of our really fine writers nationally, over the years, dropped out of college. So it's what it is that we're offering people a process. And I would say that since so much of what you do with the low residency program is in some ways teach yourself, we can just maybe make that process a little faster. I think people might get where they end up, but probably it would take them 10 years instead of 3. Partly because revision is what you teach in writing. It's hard to teach somebody to have talent, but it isn't so hard to teach somebody how to reopen something and work it to its best. And what we can do, I think, people will say, well, this needs revision. Well, if you knew what to do, you would have already done it.
Absolutely.
So it's a matter of offering alternative suggestions, not this is a way to do something, but if you did so-and-so, the effect might be such and such. However, maybe you don't want that, in which case maybe why not try so-and-so? And give a writer some alternative ways of approaching that will help them revisit the work. And that is something that I think we can offer in so many different ways.
The length of your program is 3 years?
It's a 3-year, 4-residency program, and I'd like to say more about that.
Okay, and I'd like also to hear, as you're talking about that, please tell us again what low residency
let me, first of all, I'd like to pull back. Judith was describing from inside the mentorship process, and in a way what she was describing any teacher of creative writing would say in their own level. We help you learn what you're doing. But your question was larger. Why MFA?
But I'm very satisfied with your answer.
I'm satisfied with her answer, too. She's a brilliant writer and mentor. But I think the larger perspective, I totally agree with what she said. I say it first when I talk to any group. You don't need an MFA to be a writer if you don't know that. In fact, we don't want you in our program. But what is it good for is what you're asking. So it is certainly a very important credential in certain areas, but there's no job market hungry for MFAs. And I would say this, there are 2 kinds of programs. There are residency programs at major universities like UW in Seattle and many others that have graduate departments and or part of an English department that gives that degree if you complete the requisite academic requirements, many workshops, courses, etc. And the low residency program does not require you to be at the university with the sort of full-time status that a residency does. We know from our experiences, many of us and many of your audience, that a graduate school can kind of take over your life, and it's real appropriate to younger people who want to go live the graduate student life. On the whole, low residencies are intended to attract people who have busy lives, and ours is certainly that way, people whose lives are busy domestically, professionally, many other ways. And yet to engage your best writer self is our purpose for the sake of challenge development. And although I use the word lonely to describe a sense of the writing act, we are in a tremendously supportive community, which people look for. Now, the degree can lead to various sorts of outcomes other than pride or sense of achievement. In our own program, which is not oriented, as, say, residencies tend to be, toward university-based residency programs tend to be toward who gets what job. We're not looking for that. We're looking for literary achievement.
How do you measure literary achievement?
Well, I just want to say this. We've had a number of people, nevertheless, get 4-year university jobs, 2-year jobs, adjunct who didn't have that before. And those who haven't get tenure where they are or increase. So there's a credential. Others work at literary centers. The new managing director of Fish Trap in Oregon is one of our graduates, and I assume that having the terminal degree played a role in her ability to have the position, etc. So it's got a lot of cultural capital associated with it. Now, how do we determine literary achievement? Because of our style of not encouraging destructive competitiveness, we don't officially celebrate some of the amazing achievements of our really quality students we attract. But once you graduate, I tell them we're going to trumpet your achievements to the high heavens. So, of course, one of these achievements can just be publishing. Another can be getting national recognition. But we mean something way beyond that. We mean that you are writing, that you're writing better, you're publishing hopefully sooner or later on some level, that you are giving back to the community perhaps. We have a number of graduates who are editors of magazines, Floating Bridge Press in Seattle is an example. I mentioned the Fish Trap, there are many others. That you are an active member of the literary community, or perhaps a lone writer really doing fine work that finds its place. In April of this year, we had a graduate win the George Plimpton Prize in Fiction from the Paris Review, and within weeks of that, the same month, one of our then participants, one of our students in the program, won first place in the Atlantic Monthly Fiction Contest. And so there is that level. I could say more about how this plays on whom we admit.
Well, I'm sure you have an evaluation process, which we can get to. I find it wonderful to hear of all that achievement and the fact that you do, when you're a writer, have to segregate your hopes for yourself in your writing career from your actions writing, that you're writing in order to write this piece to its perfection. And having a mentor help you do that is, I think, good companionship and friendship along the way, as well as somebody who can look at your work and notice where you haven't really delved to the depths that it can go. So I think that as writers, we do learn that there's both sides to ourselves. There is the lonely, I'm going to do the best I can just because I want to, because this is what I enjoy doing. This is how I learn. And then there's the other side of us that certainly hopes that someday someone else will recognize that as significant. So maybe, Judith, you could talk a little bit about when you're a mentor to somebody in the program and they get confused with the speed at which a piece should be ready to go out there and attain this literary achievement. How do you help them center on what needs to be done?
Well, I have found that the students who are willing to sort of put some of their ambitions on hold actually end up doing the best, because their ambitions then are for the work and not for the trappings that the work can sometimes bring. And that the students who are hungry for publication often are willing to send it out long before I would say it was ready to go out. And I know that I recognize that same tendency in myself. I often send things out and then wish I had waited a while because I'm having more interesting ideas later. So I try to caution people to take their time and not worry about it. By the time they're adult writers, when they're coming to us, they have already missed being the top of their generation of writers in terms of age, because there's always that quick, clever, terrific young writer who's already published 4 books at the age of 30, and they aren't going to be that person. So instead of having that ambition that they're going to rise to some sort of, and if you really think about it, what is it to have published 4 books at the age of 30? If you called out that person's name on the street corner, almost nobody would recognize it. We're not talking about anything major.
That does speak a little bit to something else your program's offering, which is when you get that recognition by the time you're 30, you are thrust into the community of writers in perhaps a special niche, but you're recreating this feeling that we want, which is to be recognized, maybe not for our writing right away, but to be recognized and recognize ourselves as people who write, who take writing seriously, who want to accomplish
right.
that.
And to try to take off your back, sort of, that feeling of expectation, which I think some of the people I've noticed, long trajectories of long careers. And I say to myself sometimes as a reviewer, I might read somebody's 8th book of poetry, and I think, this isn't much better than the last one. Well, who says that every book has to get better, and that we suppose you had a great book early in your career? I mean, you're letting yourself down for the rest of your life, and that's not the issue. The issue is that you're spending the time doing something you really love, perfecting it to the best of your ability. Writing is one of those things, and obviously there are other arts like this, but where you start and you look up 4 hours later and you wonder, where did that time go? You've had it suspended for a little while, and you've been somewhere else, and you've been creating, and it's pleasure in and of itself.
Well, one of the things I want to say is that I believe that, and I think it's been written about, that when you're in that place where time goes by and you've been writing and you don't even know how all that time went by, your brain is actually operating in a way called flow, where both sides of the brain are engaged, and it is a timeless place and a very healthy place for us to enter. So I think that it is gratifying in and of its own. And then most of the advice I hear is whatever that was you created during that time when you didn't know time was going by, it's a good idea to put it away for a little bit and then come back to it with your time-filled eyes and look at it. I'm wanting to make sure that before we end, we address just a little bit about what you most want to say.
Yeah.
I can see, Stan, that you have something brimming.
I kind of was thinking about the overview, and I do want to say something about MFAs. First of all, if you're happy in your writing group, if you're happy with your current writing activities, a lot of people read here or there, they write, they meet with friends who share work, fine. But if you want the little further challenge of a broader sense of what you might still do, then you might think about the further education. And it's not education, certainly not in our program, and in the best low residencies, sort of sitting in a classroom education. We very much have at the Rainier Writing Workshop a community of writers that's inspirational for one another. It's challenging, it's smart. Like the best low residencies, we read, we write critically, not as graduate students or theorists or researchers, but as writers. And I wanted to say that there is kind of a difference in age. You tend to find younger people going through the university-based residencies. They want to meet other people their age. They want the exciting university life. And they're aimed for, maybe if they're lucky, a tenure-track assistant professorship somewhere in a brutal market. And the low residency venture is overall, I have a pretty good overview of it, a very quality venture. And I just want to make clear that low residencies are not distance learning of the online learning sort. There may be a program or two that extensively use that kind of education, but overwhelmingly the programs I'm familiar with, and there are about roughly 50 of them now nationally, a low residency program means you will be on the campus of the university, it's usually a university, sponsoring it, giving the degree, for a limited period of time, maybe a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. Typically, you'll come twice a year, a fall or winter and a spring or summer. There are some low residencies that will feature a summer abroad where you have a lot of fun. I'm not sure how much writing gets done, but you do have a good time over there. And we have a program that wants to send you back into the community. So we even have components in the program that you do outside of the community.
Perhaps you could tell us about some of the projects that are outside the community or inside your own MFA low residency community.
Well, we do have relationships with several artists and writers communities nationally where people go. We've had people interning at presses. We have people set up their own journeys and voyages and educational experiences. One was a woman who took a night course at the University of Oregon on petroglyphs and went up the Columbia River studying them. Some of these have led to books on their own, these projects you're referring to that are a very important part of our particular program. And that is, for example, a writer from Seattle who had lived over in Hanford as a very small girl, went over there to interview the woman who'd written most about it from that perspective when she'd been there. And instead, she came back with prose poems, and now the University of Washington is going to be publishing the book. Kathleen Flanagan, who won a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship.
Kathleen Flanagan, and she is Floating Bridge Press editor.
Another book that came out of our special projects was one by Holly Hughes, who has read here in Port Townsend at Northwind, is known in the area. And Holly had done some residencies, but we encouraged her with what might have been fatal encouragement to go for her larger ambition of putting an Alzheimer's-oriented anthology together. And as we don't expect books to be published while you're in the program out of these, they're not meant to necessarily do that. But a couple of years after she left the program, the book was published and has gone through several editions and is read by Alzheimer's communities. It includes writing by caregivers, early stage sufferers, some medical people, and the Alzheimer's Society seems to have taken it up. It's called Beyond Forgetting, and I just want to say it's a fabulous book published by Kent State University.
I'd like to add one more
Press.
with a Port Townsend connection, and that is Jennifer Culkin's book called A Final Arc of Sky. She was one of the trauma nurses on the ubiquitous helicopters that arrive at Jefferson Healthcare and take people across the water. And she has written a wonderful sort of philosophical examination of the whole process of caring for people who are, in real traumatic situations.
Okay, and repeat her name again then?
Jennifer Culkin.
And the book is?
It's called A Final Arc of Sky, published by Beacon Press.
Okay, thank you. It is time to wrap up, and I would just like to say that if people want to find out more about your program, they would visit...
They would go to www.plu.edu/MFA or look at rwwsoundings.com, because that is the student sort of run magazine that is associated with the program and has all links everywhere.
Thank you so much, Judith and Stan, for being here, for filling us in on your world in the Rainier Writers Workshop and the world of writers. I think we're tremendously endowed to have so many ways in which writers can get together nationally, regionally, locally, and perform their art and learn from one another. I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sheila. It's a pleasure to talk writing with a writer.
I'm your host, Sheila Bender, saying goodbye until next time on In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on the writing life.